Hi, everybody. It's Jim. Great Books, Big Ideas. I'm continuing on my long march through the great books with a year one reading plan. And next up today is the some American state papers, the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution of the United States, and then a selection of the Federalist Papers by Alexander Hamilton, John Jay, and James Madison. So let's jump right into it right here on Great Books, Big Ideas. Well, I hope many of you, most of you, have already read the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Those are not long documents at all. They are foundational documents to our republic here in America. The Declaration of Independence was largely the brainchild of Thomas Jefferson, and we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, yada, yada, yada. You know the routine. It's a great example of logical argumentation, laying out the evidence and the reasons why it's time for the American colonies to part ways with the mother country, Great Britain. King George does not fare well in the Declaration of Independence. He's cast in the role of a tyrant. Perhaps Jefferson's laying it on a little thick, but he's got a point to make, and just rhetorically speaking, it's really a masterwork of rhetoric. Also, then you go to the Constitution, and if you are reading the Constitution in this version, you're not going to get every single amendment to the Constitution. The Constitution was ratified on September 17, 1787. And it has all the articles and then the amendments. That you don't get all the amendments. This one only goes up to 22. If you have the newer edition of great books, like I do, I don't have it to show you right now, but that catches you up to the next two amendments, I guess the 23rd and the 24th. The 23rd Amendment is one that people have been talking about a lot these days because it lays out provisions or circumstances in which the president can, in effect, be unseated from office if he's incapable of carrying forth the duties of his office. And then the 24th Amendment was extending the voting rights to people at the age of 18. Like when you're 18, you have the right to vote. So anyway, the Constitution, it's amazingly concise, and of course it's an imperfect document. That's why we have amendments to it, but it's really a foundational political theory document that everyone ought to read, no matter what you think about it. I want to focus this on the Federalist Papers, though, so we're going to talk a little bit about this selection. And let me give you what the World Book Encyclopedia says about the Federalist Papers, because we don't read all of them here. They're all in this book, but there are 85 of them, but we're only read a sampling of them. So the Federalist is a series of 85 letters written to newspapers by Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, and John Jay. The letters urge ratification of the Constitution. So this was in play. The founders had met in Philadelphia. They deliberated. They came out with this draft Constitution, and now they're sending it out to the states to be ratified. The letters sought to influence the New York ratifying convention, and all except 8 of these essays appeared during 1787 and 1788, and they're all under the signature Publius as the author. They appeared in the Independent Journal, a semi-weekly New York newspaper, and Hamilton, by and large, wrote the bulk of the Federalist Papers. He wrote 51 of them, Madison wrote 29, and John Jay wrote 5 of them. And the collected essays appeared in book form as the Federalist. The Articles of Confederation were sort of seen as being ineffective, like they didn't There was a need to rewrite the book and come up with a constitution. And the Federalists are putting forth the Unionist to Federalist case. So they're pointing out the weaknesses of the Articles and the dangers of British sea power and Spanish intrigue and power. These are sort of contending forces on the North American continent. And then the desirability and need for a strong central government that comes across loud and clear here. And then see how to safeguard the new Constitution. They didn't defend every point in the Constitution, but they argued that it was the best that we could do. And there was agreement among the founders. So here it is. Here's why it's a good thing and why we ought to sign on to it. It's interesting because New York was one of the last states to actually ratify a constitution. There was a lot of resistance in that state to this, and hence the need for the Federalist Papers. So let me give you some quick summaries of the Federalist Papers that were assigned in this reading plan for year one. First, we'll go through numbers 1 through 10. Number 1 is written by Hamilton, and here he's basically stating the purpose of the Federalist Papers. He says, I propose to discuss the utility of the Union to your political prosperity, the insufficiency of the present Confederation, that's the Articles of Confederation, the necessity of a government at least equally energetic with the one proposed to the attainment of this object, the conformity of the proposed Constitution to the true principles of Republican government, and lastly, the additional security which its adoption will afford to the preservation of that species of government, to liberty and to property. Notice how he says not just liberty and property. Well, he says liberty and property, but he doesn't say the pursuit of happiness, which is Jefferson's language in the Declaration of Independence. Jefferson and Hamilton didn't see eye to eye politically on things, and that's just going back to the John Lockean language there of going back to property. Hamilton is much more conservative. He's more of an aristocrat than Jefferson was. Jefferson's more of a Democrat. Wants to invest power in the people. Anyway, so he's basically just laying out the purpose of the Federalist Papers. Number 2 is written by John Jay, and here the question is the Constitution more conducive to Americans because it asserts that we are going to be one nation under a federal government instead of separate confederacies, or in addition to separate confederacies. And Publius, the quote author of the Federalist, clearly favors the Union position, and this particular number seems intended to establish the credibility of the founders who met at the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, in this room behind me, and these were, quote, men who possessed the confidence of the people, and many of whom had become highly distinguished by their patriotism, virtue, and wisdom in times which tried the minds and hearts of men, undertook the arduous task, and in the mild season of peace, with minds unoccupied by other subjects, they passed many months in cool, uninterrupted, and daily consultation, and finally, without having been awed by power or influenced by any passions except love for their country, they presented and recommended to the people the plan produced by their joint and very unanimous councils. So these were good guys. They work hard. They're credible. They're authoritative. And they're just kind of laying out the ethos of the founders. Number 3, also by John Jay, discusses the safety of the people of the United States and why this form of government, the Union, best secures that. The preservation of peace and tranquility against the threats foreign and domestic. This is the best way to preserve that peace. And number 4, also by John Jay, this analyzes circumstances to explain why nations go to war, and he maintains that the Union is best positioned to protect from such threats if foreign nations, quote, see that our national government is efficient and well administered, our trade prudently regulated, our militia properly organized and disciplined, our resources and finances discreetly managed, our credit reestablished, our people free, contented, and united, they will be much more disposed to cultivate our friendship than provoke our resentment. You see these long periodic sentences that they love to write back in the 18th century. Number 5, also by John Jay, this one draws lessons from the history of Great Britain to assert that a divided confederation would be prone to envy and jealousy and self-interest. And then number 6, we turn to Alexander Hamilton, who takes up the problem of dissensions between the states, so the internal strife, the domestic factions, and he explores the causes of hostility among nations, like the love of power, the desire of preeminence and dominion, the jealousy of power, the rivalries of economic competition, and innumerable private passions. And then he seeks examples from classical and European history to show that we should have no trust in the theories that say a confederacy would be exempt from the fallacies and weaknesses of these historical precedents. It just doesn't work. And then number 7, also by Hamilton, takes up the theme of territorial disputes and competition between states. And he concludes, quote, America, if not connected at all or only by the feeble tie of a simple league, offensive and defensive, would, by the operation of such jarring alliances, be gradually entangled in all the pernicious labyrinths of European politics and wars. Can't have that. And by the destructive contentions of the parts into which she was divided, would likely to become a prey to the artifices and machinations of powers equally the enemies of them all. And then in number 8, Hamilton explores the consequences of a confederation, which would be war between the states, standing armies, and generally a tendency towards despotism. In Federalist number 9, Hamilton quotes Montesquieu at length. Montesquieu is also in the great books, on the subject of the Confederate Republic, which serves as a model for the U.S. Constitution. Here's a quote. The proposed Constitution, so far from implying an abolition of the state governments, makes them constituent parts of the national sovereignty by allowing them a direct representation in the Senate, and leaves in their possession certain exclusive and very important portions of sovereign power. This fully corresponds in every rational import of the terms with the idea of a federal government, end quote. And then we turn to number 10. This is one of the more important ones, I think. This was by James Madison. The theme here is factions. The Union is best able to quote, break and control the violence of faction. The friend of popular governments never finds himself so much alarmed for their character and fate as when he contemplates their propensity to this dangerous vice. He will not fail, therefore, to set a due value on any plan which, without violating the principles to which he is attached, provides a proper cure for it. The instability, injustice, and confusion introduced into the public councils have in truth been the mortal diseases under which popular governments have everywhere perished, end quote. So you can see he associates faction with vice and disease. What is meant by faction? Well, Madison tells us a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or minority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community, end quote. It's a broad definition, but that's what he says. There are 2 methods for curing this problem, Madison says. You can remove the causes of faction, or you can remove the effects. On the removal side, there are two ways to go about removing it. You can destroy liberty or give every citizen the same opinions, passions, and interests. And here's a quote. It could never be more truly said than of the first remedy that it was worse than the disease. Liberty is to faction what air is to fire, an element without which it instantly expires. But it could not be less folly to abolish liberty, which is essential to political life, because it nourishes faction, than it would be to wish the annihilation of air, which is essential to animal life, because it imparts to fire its destructive agency. So the idea here is like to just take away everyone's liberty. The cure is worse than the problem. The second remedy is just as impractical. You're never going to be able to form a unity of opinion about anything. You can't kind of eliminate faction by like making everyone agree with everybody, because no one's ever going to always agree on everything. So the causes of faction cannot be removed. What we have to do is control the effects of faction. The principle of majority rule in Republican government allows us to defeat the, quote, sinister views of a minority faction by regular vote. So if a minority faction rises up and is causing trouble, well, you can just vote them down. The majority can vote them down. But what if it's a majority faction, the tyranny of the majority, as it were? That's harder to deal with. And he says a direct democracy, like you might have had in ancient Athens, say, that it cannot cure it. But a Republican government can. We delegate power to representatives who, in effect, filter and regulate the passions riled up by factions. Some might say it dilutes it. And the union form of government is better able than a confederation to deal with the disease. Okay, that's an important one. Now we jump on to Federalist number 15, written by Hamilton. He takes up the issue of the insufficiency of the present Confederation to preserve the Union. It's a structural problem in his view. Quote, the great and radical vice in the construction of the existing Confederation is in the principle of legislation for states or governments in their corporate or collective capacities, and as contradistinguished from the individuals of which they consist. That's kind of wordy, but maybe you get the point. In other words, the United States is on the brink of humiliation because it lacks the central government authority over individual states. Number 31, also written by Hamilton, argues that the federal government must possess an unlimited power of taxation to fulfill its duties of national defense and public safety. Then we jump to number 47, written by James Madison. This one looks at the concept of separation of powers, another important one, arguing that it does not require a total separation of powers, but rather prevents any one branch from wielding complete power over another. And then number 51, which was written either by Hamilton or Madison. I think it was probably written by Madison, but this one explains how the Constitution's system of checks and balances leverages human self-interest to protect individual liberty and prevent tyranny. So a lot about checks and balances there, and sort of understanding human psychology. You need checks and balances to kind of counterbalance that. And number 68, written by Hamilton, defends the institution of the Electoral College as a safer, more stable way to insulate the presidency from foreign influence and populist manipulation. A lot of controversy about the Electoral College these days. Number 69, this paper written by Hamilton contrasts the American president with the British monarch, the king, showing that the U.S. executive's powers are limited and they are checked by Congress and they are held accountable to the people. And then number 70 by Hamilton argues that a vigorous and, quote, energetic chief executive is essential for national security and administration of laws, coming down solidly on the side of a strong, powerful president. Number 71, Hamilton defends the 4-year term of presidents. This gives the president time and stability needed to make long-term decisions for the public good. So you got a lot of these numbers, you get down into the details of government structure and how best to do things. Okay, that is a fast rundown, maybe not fast enough for you or me, but it was an attempt at a fast rundown of what these numbers are about. Let me give you a few discussion starter questions, and several of these questions invite us to think about the state of our democratic republic today and how this fares versus the theorizing that was in the time of the writing of the Constitution. Okay, the first one has to do with faction and the executive. In Federalist number 10, James Madison argues that a large republic is the best way to control the, quote, mortal disease of faction. And these are groups, again, that are driven by self-interest and passion over the public good. But in Federalist number 70 and 71, Alexander Hamilton staunchly defends a powerful, energetic, single chief executive with a stable 4-year term as a means to resist popular passions. Now, the question for discussion is this: does Hamilton's design for a powerful presidency complement Madison's strategy for controlling factions, or does placing so much, quote, energy in a single executive risk creating the exact kind of centralized tyranny and powerful faction leader that the early papers warned against? So are there contradictions between the two men? Are there contradictions even within the Constitution with regard to this? Let's move on. Here's a second discussion topic. Federalist number 51 gives us the iconic phrase, ambition must be made to counteract ambition, suggesting that the personal interest of politicians will naturally lead them to defend their respective branches of government, like Congress, judicial branch, executive. Here's the thing to think about. When we look at our modern political landscape, does Madison's assumption hold true? Do politicians today fight to protect the constitutional power of their branch, executive versus legislative? Or has party loyalty and ideological polarization superseded institutional ambition, leading to gridlock rather than a healthy balance of power? It could lead to gridlock. It could also lead to sort of lockstep, right? So if you have a very powerful president and Congress isn't standing up for its institution, then the president just steamrolls over Congress and it's like, oh, I'm going to go to war with a country, say Iran, and yeah, I know I'm supposed to report to you. I know I'm supposed to get a declaration of war. I know there's a War Powers Act, but I just don't feel like bothering with that. And then when the time comes for Congress to vote on that and sort of limit the power of the president, they just kind of roll over and die. Like that. That's an example of what we're talking about here. And then number 3, the separation of powers is a contentious issue. Where really interesting the way the founders of the Constitution set this up. Now, here's the question I have about this: is the separation of powers principle designed to slow down change until the public calms down, and so we're not swayed by these pesky, passionate factions. And then in modern American representative government, which is the greater threat? Or should we be more worried about a powerful executive who will overreach and neuter the separation of powers? It's kind of like I used in my last example. Or does the separation of power, the system of checks and balances, in effect prevent necessary change from happening? In other words, is gridlock a bug or a feature? One common criticism about Congress is nothing seems to ever get done effectively. It's like everything's gridlock. And it's very messy. And then the president, who's, we have a pretty powerful executive branch in the modern presidency. I'm not just talking about the current person in power, but just it's been a trend. Like they just basically do what they want to, with few checks and balances on them. And then, so the question is, like, does clogging things with in this effort to sort of mitigate factions and having separation of powers and checks and balances, are we really preventing progressive change from happening? And something I've always wondered is that by design? Like, the founders didn't want much in the way of progressive change. Like, is the Constitution an inherently conservative document that's afraid of radical change and afraid of populism and things of that nature? But then have you set up a kind of government that's now going to kind of like empower a president to basically become his own faction and then sort of dominate the political space? Meanwhile, you all can't agree with one another, and you're all kind of like have petty differences and ideological differences and party loyalties and so on and so forth. And you don't really care about your own institution. And meanwhile, this sort of potential tyrant is out there kind of knowing exactly what he wants and is just going to do it and flout your powers at all. So you can see that the Constitution, the American State Papers, these are living documents, but I wonder if they're on life support. Maybe it's time for a new constitutional convention to kind of fix some of the bugs in the document. I mean, that's why we have amendments too, but I don't know. Like, I wonder these days, over the course of my long life, having seen just a lot of like nice talk about the Constitution, but I don't know if we're living up to those principles, and I'm not sure the document is mature enough to deal with the problems that we now face in the 21st century. I'll just put it out there, float it out there, see what you can do with it. Let's see if you have an opinion on it. You can always ask questions and weigh in the comments below. Finally, next up on the year one reading plan is Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, Introduction, Book 1, Chapter 9. I peeked ahead at that, and it looks like it's a pretty brief reading, but I think I read that right. So we'll just follow what they want us to read, and maybe I'll work up my Adam Smith video a lot faster than normal. We'll see. Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care. Everyone be well. See you again soon.